Hello, AP Psych. So right now, I've just basically set up what I'm going to tell you about today. I should let you know that this week on Tuesday, I'm going to give you guys your test, which will be 1 hour. Like the minute you start it, then you can work through it for about an hour. And then you hand it in kind of the same way you've been doing your homework. And I put it up here, so I'll just kind of point it this way. So I made it so that you have it's 30 multiple choice questions, I think, one FRQ, and you can type it or write it on loose leaf, up to you. And it's all on Unit 10. After we finish this chapter, this Unit 11, we'll start reviewing for the AP, because after this, there's nothing left. So, and then after the AP, we'll go through the disorders, the treatments, and social psych. So we'll be done with those. So I broke this up into, because it wasn't necessarily like a very long module, but there's a lot of information in here that I wanted to make sure I covered. So your first homework from module 61 will be doing notes from 617 to 620. So homework tonight will be 617 to 620. That just notes. And then tomorrow will be the next set, or the multiple choice and FRQs from module 61. Okay, so just remember, so Tuesday I'm gonna kind of open it up in the beginning, and then you'll have an hour through Google Classroom to work on it, and then you can just submit it right through Google Classroom. So, all right. So, good. All right. So let me mention the beginning of Module 61, which talks about like how you measure intelligence. So, like I was saying before, intelligence is measured quantitatively with a number of tests. Nowadays, you'll hear people talk about the Wechsler or the Wechsler. I don't know exactly how to pronounce the name. I think it's Wechsler. It is Wechsler, yeah, because it's CHSLER. So the Wechsler adult intelligence scale. It's based on this test that they'll give this test, and it's got all these questions on it, and basically very very much school oriented questions, and depending on you do on that, you get a score for your IQ test. So the Wechsler is how they do that. They do that in special ed at our school. So, like if you get tested through our school, I believe that's the test that they give. And then teachers and administrators and guidance counselors would get your score, and they could know what your IQ score was the day you took that test. Not what your IQ is, it's what your IQ score was on the day of the test. So, but before we talk about that, the little history of this is kind of interesting. So, actually, Dalton's cousin was this guy named Francis Galton, who wrote a book called Hereditary Genius. He came up with an idea that eventually became eugenics, which is kind of a nasty movement that occurred in Britain, the United States, and then Germany when they went through the Holocaust. It's a way of eliminating populations based on their genetics. So it's it's basically like a massacre of a race of people. So this didn't have like a good start to it. So Galton but he was measuring things like I mean, if you read it, you'll see the kind of things that he was measuring to be considered intelligence are sort of ridiculous. But it was, I think it was an idea that has merit. You know, it's good to know, you know, what your intelligence score is, so you can be put in the right classes, or you know, you're not over your head. But what happens is people take the information and use it the wrong way. What Binet did. So Binet was a person who kind of helped out the Paris school system. So the Paris school system is a public school system in which people would be going to school based on age. And so you'd go to school and you'd be put in, you know, poor, rich, you know, smart, not smart, whatever. You'd be put in the same class, and teachers would be overwhelmed because you couldn't teach to the class. You'd have to like break the class up into 24 to 30 different, you know, learning paradigms, because people were so different. You know, you had the poor who didn't even own a book at home versus the wealthy who had tutors when kids were like 1 and 2 coming into these classes, and they were in the same classes, and it was a huge mess. So Binet cleaned that up by giving everybody a uniform IQ test, so to speak. It wasn't an IQ test at the time, but it was just an intelligence test to see where you fit. And then based on your score, you'd be put into a particular class. I think he had premonitions. I remember reading somewhere that he had premonitions about this being, it was going to be used in the wrong way, and it certainly was. You know, Binet was the person that kind of came up with this. Let me see if I can get the age. When was this? I think it was like early 19s. 1904. Yeah, 1904 was the Minister of Public Education did that. So Galton was in the 1800s. So this is 1904, and then Terman, it was somewhere in the early 1900s also. They don't give a date for when he tested, but Terman was in California, and he was employed at Stanford, and came up with the first IQ test. So now the IQ test, he called it the Stanford Binet IQ test, and he took a smattering of California, you know, high schoolers, and gave them like this huge test, you know, all through California. And he took anybody that scored, I think it was a 130 or above. I think it was 130. All right, they're not giving me this data, but I believe it was a 130. And which a 130 IQ score is very close to genius level. And he selected these, you know, kids who scored a 130 or above in California, and followed them throughout their entire lives. So, in terms of, you know, health, marriage, college, money. He did all these things. All these. He took all this data from all these kids that did really well on this IQ test, and he compared them to the kids who didn't do well on the IQ test, and he found that, you know, kids who were really smart did remarkably better in intelligence. You know, that not only intelligence, but money, less divorce, better health, you know, more property, etc. Like he had all these different categories that he quantitatively, you know, got all this data for, and he called his group the termites. That was their technical group. Interestingly, though, he did test the year he tested. He ended up he did test. I believe it was like 2 Nobel Prize winners, but the 2 Nobel Prize winners. This is like good news for anybody that doesn't score well on IQ tests. Is the 2 Nobel Prize winners were below. They didn't qualify to become a termite, yet they won the Nobel Prize. So if that's any consolation for those people that didn't make the termites. That was good. But anyways, what he did was this real long study throughout their entire lives. So and my mind is like blanking on this. Now I have to look. So there was it's a type of study. Literally, the time that I'm doing this, I'll probably remember this. Sectional. My mind just blanked out here. Longitudinal. So he did a huge longitudinal study. That did not come back. Longitudinal study, which means he followed a cohort of people for a long time. So followed a cohort. And it was funny. I think on the AP test, I forgot how many years ago. It was probably like 5 or 6 years ago. They had this question that said, compared to people that weren't, quote unquote, the termites, what did he find out about the very, very smart versus the very like the not as smart as the termites? And what was funny was they were really well adjusted. Like we always think, oh man, they're really smart, they're not well adjusted or whatever. It's the exact opposite. Actually, they were like very pleasant and warm and lovely people. They actually were really well adjusted. So there's no real downside to being smart, really, if you think about it. It's sort of just, you were born with, sort of a gift, you could say, and you didn't choose it. And there's not a whole big swing that can occur based on the way you're brought up. Like you either have it or you don't. And it's very, very, very genetic. So it was just kind of, but they ended up being wonderful people. Like the termites were on average, like really well-adjusted people. Okay, so to figure out the IQ score, what they used to do was they did mental age over chronological age times 100. So if we were calculating, if I said, well, I have a 9-year-old child who scores like an average, let's make it easy, 6-year-old, and I said, what's the IQ? You would say, all right, well, your mental age would be what you score like. So your mental age is 6 over what you actually are, which is your chronological age, times 100, which would give you an IQ score of 67, which means you're probably not going to be in a regular school. Like if you have an IQ of 67, you wouldn't be in AP Psych. You'd be in a special school or a special program. I believe the number is 70, which is 2 standard deviations below the normal. That's kind of the cutoff to getting into high school. So, but that's your IQ score. So that would be an IQ score of this person. They don't really do this anymore because, like, if you're an adult and you're like, well, I'm 30 and I score like an average 90-year-old, like that doesn't make any sense. Like you'd have an IQ score of 33, which is basically enough, enough energy to kind of make sure that you have the motor capabilities of walking and, but that would be profoundly, hampered intellectually. So they don't usually use this score anymore. They just calculate it based on, average scores of other people. And they do standardize this test, which we'll talk about next time. So, and they use the Wechsler. The Wechsler is the WAIS, which is what we use at schools now. And if you're really young, they use the WISC, which is for children. So the WISC is for children. It's the same company, like the Wechsler, but it's really for children. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to mention was achievement versus aptitude tests. So achievement tests are things that you study for. You know, you take the AP test at the end of the year. AP tests are achievement tests. I spelled achievement wrong. Achievement tests are things that you can study for. You know, they're basically showing what you learned by studying. So the AP test, the Regents, the SAT 2s, like you kind of know what to expect. There's not a whole lot of surprise and the aptitude test is supposed to be predictive. So an example of these would be the police test or the firefighter test. You know, you take these tests and, you know, they may have something to do with, you know, how well you studied, but very little. Most of it is like, you know, how fast you think on your feet, your common sense, and kind of like street smarts. So aptitude test is predictive. Achievement tests you study for. Now, the SAT, the regular SAT, it used to be called the Scholastic Aptitude Test. Now they just call it the SAT. They don't have, they don't like represent the letters. They just say, oh, it's the SAT. There are some tricky questions in there that are things that you probably couldn't study for. And so it sort of bridges somewhere between here is probably where the SAT is. And it's supposed to be something you really can't study for, and it's supposed to be predictive about a future behavior. So, anyways, you know, when you're taking the SAT and you score, you know, really well on the SAT, that tells the colleges that it's probably a pretty good predictor of how you're going to do in college. Surprisingly, it is a pretty good predictor of how you're going to do in college. And the other thing that's also a good predictor of college grades is your high school grades. So if you wanted to get into a prestigious college, you probably should do well on both. Don't just count on one or the other. But that is something that you'll see in our everyday world here. So, all right. Have a good Monday, and I'll see you soon. Remember, test tomorrow.